Welcome to Beyond the Reiki Gateway, a podcast reserved for the spiritually curious. Journey further with Reiki Masters Kathleen Johnson and Andrea Kennedy through in-depth conversations, many featuring inspiring and intriguing special guests to enrich your unique spiritual progression. Hello, everyone. Andrea and Kathleen here. We usually have a pretty good plan about how our episodes are going to unfold, who our guests are going to be, because Kathleen and I are usually pretty organized. But we're going to actually get a little bit real with you today, and we're going to have a conversation, just Kathleen and myself. We're going to sort of let you in to our own conversation. We get together every now and again, and we check in with each other. And we share our thoughts and feelings about a variety of things because we're friends, and that's what friends do. And so we're really glad to have you with us here for this episode. And we hope that you'll sit down and listen and join our conversation and reach out with your own thoughts on whatever it is we're going to cover. And I want to start off today with Kathleen and just really ask you, Kathleen, our listeners know you've had COVID recently, and let's just check in and ask you, how are you doing?
How am I doing? I'm doing better, thanks. Physical symptoms seem to be receding. Still struggling a bit with some of the emotional stuff. COVID is really no joke. And we can get into that a little bit, Andrea. I mean, as you mentioned in the intro, we do have these conversations pretty regularly, I would say. And I think some of what we say could be of value to our listeners because, every now and then we come up with some gems. Not to pat ourselves on the back, but we do come up with a few nuggets that I think could be valuable. And I think sharing them is a really good thing to do from time to time. So you mentioned a few moments ago that the listeners can, sit down, make themselves comfortable, and listen in. And I would also add, maybe make a cup of tea while we spill the tea on each other and kind of check in, not just with each other, but with you, the listeners. So, all right, COVID, right? I mean, COVID. All right. So, as you may know, and many of our listeners do too by this point, I came down with the new variant in mid-July. And I was out of commission a lot longer than I expected to be. And it was rather interesting, and I hesitate to use that word for something as destructive and horrible as COVID. But in my view, it was somewhat interesting because, first of all, I had about 2 weeks to just kind of do nothing and sort of be waited on to some degree. My youngest son was pretty much just throwing food into the room and backing out as quickly as possible because he was terrified of catching anything from me. But the thing is, I didn't hate being down for the count. It was kind of nice. Feel a little guilty saying that, but it's true. I didn't hate being in bed, just hanging out. Aside from feeling lousy, it really wasn't all that bad. And one of the surprising things about it was, oh my goodness, the time for self-reflection, the time for contemplation, and the insights that began to emerge and information that began to come in was very surprising to me. But I think it was because I was so quiet and I was so still. And I also know now that if I hadn't come down with COVID, I would have never done that. I would have never been in bed for that long, just lazing around. No way. That's just not who I am. So COVID in that way kind of gave me a gift. And I don't mean that as not complimenting COVID, not by any means, but, we always want to try to find the lesson and the gift in the things that seem so terrible.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because it isn't like we have gratitude for those things that happen. No. But we can have an appreciation for what comes from it, what the opportunity is, perhaps. I've said it a lot. The listeners probably have heard me say this before, but the physical body will drag us kicking and screaming to places we'd never choose to go. But that is for a reason, because there is experience to be gained, to be learned from in those places that we have to go because we have these physical bodies. And, Kathleen, I'm so happy that you're feeling better. And I totally relate to you because I actually had COVID back in May. And so it was my birthday and I had COVID. And that was such a bummer. And I remember I did have fear, this uncertainty. I felt like, who's to say what will happen? There's just so much still unknown about it. So I had some fear as I laid there. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I can't do anything. And I didn't want to do anything. I just had no energy for anything. But a wonderful lesson for me is, you know what? The world kept spinning. Everything was fine out in the world, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, maybe
Yeah.
not fine, but it was kind of just
Yeah.
going on without us,
Going on.
right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And it was a great lesson for me because I think, as you do, Kathleen, have such high standards for myself and I've got to accomplish this, that, and the next thing. And I have a list of stuff. And then, when you have to throw the list out the window and you can't do anything on the list, and then you realize, hey, the sky didn't fall. Okay. It really let me exhale and feel like, oh, I'm just going to be a regular person. I'm
Hmm.
going to I'm going to stop trying to do everything and cross everything off of that list. And I'm just going to give myself a break because that's what I do for other people. And I realized, why don't I do that for myself? That was a big lesson for me that came out of that. I just got more real with my expectations.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And you make a very good point, Andrea. I also hold myself to a pretty high standard. I had someone very recently tell me that the pressure that I feel is all self induced. And that person was not wrong. Okay, let's just leave it at that. And
Mm,
unfortunately, in my everyday life, I'm yet to figure out how to alleviate that self induced pressure. COVID gave me no choice.
mm,
As you said, I was I couldn't do anything even if I wanted to. I was just so exhausted.
mm-hmm.
And so yeah, and it was a huge lesson for me. Okay, so I didn't get all the stuff done for those 2 weeks that I expected to, but as you said, the sky didn't fall, the world kept turning, everything else kept happening, even though I wasn't really a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a good lesson too, a little bit of humility, injected in
Yeah,
there. Like, yeah, you're not all that special. You're all right. We can do without you for a while. And
right.
it helps to be reminded of that occasionally, doesn't it?
It does. It really, really does.
So yeah, the experience was not fun. I don't want to do it again. And I think it's important to add also that I'm one of these people who I was vaxxed, I was boosted, I'm wearing a mask, I social distance. I've been basically a hermit for 2.5 years, and I still got it. It just goes to show how little we know about this and how sneaky and insidious it is. So it really is something that I take very seriously. And I think that bears mentioning that, yeah, even people who really take care of themselves and watch out can get this without any problem at all. And one of the things that I'm still dealing with is not so much the physical, but I've noticed an uptick in anxiety, which is sometimes hard to manage. I've dealt with anxiety off and on for a good part of my adult life, and I've learned to manage it over the years, fortunately. But COVID sort of stirred it all up again, and it's becoming unmanageable again at times. So I'm working on that. And in doing my research on COVID, because I obsessively read everything I can about it these days, apparently that's something that a lot of people are experiencing. And although it's nice to know I'm not the only one experiencing it, it doesn't help during those middle of the night anxiety. I wouldn't say attacks, but those, oh my goodness feelings at 3 a.m.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point about the anxiety, Kathleen, because weren't we really anxious before COVID? I mean,
Oh,
I mean,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
let's get real, right? Woo. So what we've been going through started years ago, right? Years
Hmm.
ago. And,
Yes.
we don't have to go off in the weeds and talk all that stuff and politics and whatever, but politics has been part of it. But what we've seen is the dismantling, the erosion of trust of institutions and things like that. That started years ago. And I myself, I don't think I've been a huge, what's funny if I think about it? I used to have a lot of fear. As I grew up, I had a lot of fear. And that was just really how I grew up. And if I look at things, my mother and even her mother, I think they were pretty fearful. I grew up with, don't run with the scissors. You're going to fall and stab yourself. That's kind of how I grew up, being told things like that. And so
Hmm.
I was pretty fearful. It's like, oh my gosh, scissors, scissors. Oh, so I had that. And then what's really strange though is I reached a point, and I cannot even tell you when that was. I didn't have it anymore. It was like one day I realized that this weight of fear, I just didn't have it. And as much as I tried to find it, like, well, what happened? There must be an explanation. I couldn't find it. And I've just decided, I guess, for lack of any other evidence, that it was just some healing that happened. Maybe that didn't serve my highest good. I don't know. And so I had just left that fear behind. And I just think
Hmm.
that's very interesting. So I was okay. But then with the shifting of our society here in the US and the politics and all of that, I started noticing more anxiety in myself. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you've had the anxiety many, many years. And then, so this has really amplified it, then, I guess,
Hmm.
for you on top of everything else.
It has, but it's interesting what you said about fear. I too was sort of brought up that way. You'll shoot your eye out. That
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's like that movie, right? A Christmas
A Christmas
Story.
Story. I
Yes.
love
Yes.
that movie.
Yeah.
You'll shoot your eye out. Okay. It was always worst case
Yeah.
scenario. And then going to Catholic school for 12 years,
Oh,
13
gosh.
years did not help.
Mm,
Let's be honest.
yeah. Yeah.
I got a good education, but a huge injection of fear and guilt along with the good
Mm,
education. But I know what you say about fear. It just sort of disappeared. And I think for me, it did start to dissipate as I started on my spiritual path. And that was
hmm
decades ago. I mean, it was
hmm
before, quite a long time before I had Reiki. It started to dissipate. And most people would describe me. I've had people tell me that I'm fearless. I feel like I'm just like this shivering mass of jello inside,
Mm.
but people think, "Oh, you're doing all these really like interesting, brave, cool things." And I'm like, "Yeah, no. I just do it because I don't know any better. I'm just not that bright, I guess." But, since COVID, not since, well, yeah, since COVID, especially, but especially even before that, the past few years with all the upheaval politically and globally and just everything, boy, it started to creep back. So I
Mm.
completely agree and resonate with what you said about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been really hard. And then the other thing I'll say is we hear all these other things about the coronal ejections from the sun and how that makes us anxious, and the ascension and how that can make you anxious, and astrological things. And I guess maybe I'm picking on anxiety, but it can cause all kinds of different things, I
Of
guess.
course.
But we're just kind of on that topic. But I've had times where I just wake up and I might feel a little off or a little out of it. And then, so I have to kind of go down my list like, Did I sleep okay? Did I have weird dreams? Why do I feel off today? So some of my days are spent like that in the morning.
Yeah.
Why am I feeling the way I'm feeling? And then you
Hmm.
go down the list, right? It's like, is this a personal thing? Am I going through something? And then it's like, well, does this have to do with my family? Does this, and I sort of widen my gaze out more and more and more. And then it's, what about locally? What about government, world? Then it's ask the moon or whatever. And quite frankly, there are so many times I don't really know why I might feel off. And I'm wondering if those listeners that have tuned in and hung out so far, I'm wondering if they can relate to that. And what about you? I mean,
Hmm.
it's a mystery, isn't it?
It is. I had a day like that this weekend on Saturday when I woke up. I just had a feeling that something is off, and I couldn't even begin to explain it to you. But it persisted throughout the day. I was very emotional. I was in a really grumpy mood,
Mm.
and really could not define it. It was just weird. And yet on Sunday, I felt better. And for, again, no obvious reason. It's peculiar. And I thought that the anxiety, especially now with how many people are experiencing anxiety, my guides have told me that spirit is using anxiety to a certain degree to keep us motivated. So
Mm-hmm.
we don't get complacent and we don't stop doing what we're doing to help usher in the new earth, the fifth dimension, the new consciousness, whatever you choose to call it. So, with all the anxiety that's occurring across the globe these days, I'm thinking, well, if anxiety is such a great motivator, then what is it accomplishing here? Maybe there's too much of it. I don't really know, but I do feel that it does keep us from getting complacent and so everything will be okay, that feeling. Although I just know deep in my soul that everything is going to be okay ultimately. It's just going through this particular period of change and upheaval and turmoil. The emergence of a new earth is so difficult. It's like birth, it's like childbirth, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
painful and it's challenging. And it's unlike anything we've ever experienced, but we can't afford to get complacent. That's how I see it. That's the message I get.
That all seems to resonate with me. It's sort of like bringing us home to ourselves. And it's because when we are anxious, I just kind of mentioned this a minute ago. I said, what do I do when I feel off? I start asking myself questions. I start investigating. I start turning over the rocks, in my mind about trying to find the source of this.
Right.
I think what we can do is extrapolate from this one example of this anxiety sort of concept, extrapolate that out, and we have no shortage of conditions on the planet that are invitations to come home within ourselves, to evaluate how we're feeling, why we're feeling that, and what sort of relationship we are to all of these different things. One example of that was when the pandemic brought everything to a standstill, pretty much. And
Hmm.
we were just swimming in uncertainty, swimming in anxiety, fear. Never had anything like that ever happened. I mean, the apple cart wasn't upset, it was absolutely demolished, and we got applesauce, I'm going to say. But
Yes, we
um,
did.
woo, anyway, I think most of us could say that it was a time of reevaluation
Hmm.
personally and as a society and perhaps culturally, whatever, fill in the blank, because I don't think anything was left untouched there. And we've seen so many people shift away from their corporate job, what their career that they had invested so much in. I know people that have moved away from the US and they're living the dream. They're traveling now since they can, because the pandemic has waned, but they're living in other countries. They decided the hamster wheel, enough already. And they
Hmm.
decided to listen more to what their inner voice, their inner calling was leading them toward. And,
Hmm.
there's that age old question, if not now, when? And I think that they reached that turning point and said, nothing's for certain. And I don't have to do what society has told me my whole life I need to do, right? When I grew up, my thinking, my conditioning, that's the word, conditioning,
That's the
right?
word. Absolutely.
My conditioning was be the best student you can possibly be. And then you're going to go to college and you're going to get a degree. And then you're going to marry Prince Charming, right? It's got to be Prince Charming. And then you're going to live happily ever after, blah, blah, blah.
Hmm.
And then how all those details I used to wonder about. But, hey, I was told you do these things and then you end up retiring and then you can actually enjoy your life.
Right.
I thought, well, that doesn't really sound that appealing to do that. But who am I to say any different? I'm just a kid. And so that's how I started out.
Oh, sure. I think a lot of us can relate to that, probably most of us. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm older than you. I'm a generation ahead. And sure, I was the first one to graduate from college in my family too.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big deal. My parents didn't really push the marriage part with me, which I'm grateful because it took me a while to get married. And
Yeah.
I'm glad I took my time. But everything else, yeah, you're going to do this, you're going to graduate, you're going to get a good job. And then when you're old, you're going to retire, and then maybe you can have some fun. I'm thinking, well, that just sounds awful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why can't I
Yeah.
have fun in the meantime? What happens to
Yeah.
all the fun after college and before retirement, right?
Oh, I know. I don't know why this comes to my mind, but if you look at like TV shows, and I mean, it's perpetuated everywhere. That whole idea of you've got to do the corporate grind or pay your dues or whatever.
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
one day, maybe you'll get rewarded. The sad fact is, a lot of people don't even make it to retirement. They work their whole lives, and then in their early 60s, they end up having disease and
I
either
know.
either become very ill and can't do fun things,
Mhm.
or they pass away, never
Exactly.
even reaching retirement.
I know.
What a horrible, horrible tragedy that is.
That is. I know my father-in-law, that's what happened to him. He had big plans for his retirement and he passed away before he was able to do any of it. And I know there's quite a few stories like that out there. But don't you think that that attitude where you got to pay your dues, you got to work hard, that is almost just an American point of view. You look at the countries around the world, there's a much greater emphasis placed on relaxation and self care and community and that kind of family.
Hmm.
It's not so much pull yourself up by your bootstraps, boy. You don't hear a lot of that in other countries. It seems like that attitude is almost uniquely American. What do you think of that?
Well, when you started talking, I thought, well, I don't really know because this is the only perspective I really have. But as you started elaborating, then I started to connect with that. And I will say, I totally do see that. And we also see that reflected in other ways. Other countries that have healthcare systems that if you get sick, you're not going to just have to file bankruptcy
Mhm.
and lose your entire life savings.
Exactly.
That is so awful here in the US.
It is.
So, not only work your whole life and then hopefully have fun in retirement, uh, you better not get sick because even if you have insurance, right, you might
Oh,
have to
yeah.
end up losing every penny and
Mhm.
still not be able to pay it all off.
I
That is just so, I don't know. To
It's a
me,
travesty. It's a travesty.
it is. And there's just got to be a better system. Other countries have figured it out. You just really can't get away from the politics,
Hmm.
because it's money and greed. It seems to rule every aspect of our institutions here.
Right.
And, that's very difficult. I think that's at the heart of a lot of, at least what we're going through here in the US, is some antiquated systems, all of the divisiveness that has come from that. And it's pretty hard to escape it. I look back when I was a kid, it's like politics, that was way down the list of any kind of subject, of
Right.
interest.
Hmm.
And I don't think it was just because I was a kid. My parents didn't really talk about it much. And oh my goodness, you just can't escape it.
You
It's
can't.
everywhere.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. I long for the days when politics is boring again,
Yeah.
honestly. But what you were saying about the way we are in this country, I'm thinking America really is different in many ways from the rest of the world. And I know just from my work and my travels and talking to others who are from other countries, we are viewed as almost an anomaly. We have this whole rugged individualism thing going on. Everybody's in it for themselves. And if you don't make it, then it's got to be something you did. There's got to be something wrong with you. That whole attitude. And boy, that puts a lot of pressure on the individual. And as I get older, and I've thought this for a long time, but it becomes even sharper into focus these days. That is so unfair on so many levels. And again, it's a view that isn't widely shared around the globe.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, everybody else has been able to figure this out. And if we're supposed to be this great superpower country, why can't we figure it out? Right?
Yeah. The word that comes to my mind, Kathleen, is competition.
Mm,
America, it's like competition. And so
yes.
if you're going to get ahead, who are you going to bring down? And for people like you, myself, and our listeners, I just think that does not resonate with who we know we are and where we're heading, right? To the
Hmm.
new consciousness. And I think
Right.
that probably is lending to a lot of this anxiety, a lot of the unrest, a lot of that,
Exactly. I agree.
because we're enmeshed in a culture, a society that is rewarding that competitiveness, rewarding the fact that, I forgot how you put it. Oh, you've got to be your own everything,
Hmm.
forget teamwork, forget sharing the praise, forget rooting each other on. It's I,
Right.
me, my, or nothing. And for people like us, and for sensitive people, people who see a larger spiritual picture to all of this, man, that is really challenging, because it's like at every turn, it just feels like we're losing ground almost.
Exactly. And yeah, and for those of us who are on the spiritual path, it's just so frustrating because, I tell my clients that we start to see things from a different perspective as we evolve, instead of seeing everything through 3D eyes, life on planet Earth eyes is my
Yeah.
favorite phrase, right?
Yes.
Um, we don't see it that way anymore. After a while, we see it from a soul perspective, a higher perspective, and we can get a better sense or at least a glimpse of a big picture. And once you reach that point, what you see happening on planet Earth just seems so pointless and such a waste. And don't you see what you're doing wrong? That kind of feeling. And it is frustrating. It's frustrating as all get out because I'm highly sensitive. I know you are. And sometimes I just want to pull the covers over my head and say, why don't you just call me when this is all over? That feeling. But at the same time, I do see the glimmers of hope. I see more and more people waking up, and it's
Mhm.
wonderful. So that's what helps me get out of bed in the morning with maybe things aren't as terrible as I was thinking they were yesterday, that kind of feeling.
Yeah.
And because there are so many more people are waking up, and I know you're seeing that in your practice, Andrea. I'm seeing it in mine. I'm reading about it in channeled information. I'm getting it from my own guides and my own sources, my spiritual sources, that is. I'm getting it from Reiki. I'm being told that this is what's happening. And those are the sources I trust, right?
Hmm.
Because I know they're telling me truth. They're telling me the truth. And nobody's promising us it will be easy, and it hasn't been, and it's not going to continue. I mean, the hardship will continue. It's not going to get any easier, but it ultimately will.
Yeah.
And that allows me to keep doing what I'm doing because from what I understand, Earth has technically moved into the fifth dimension. However, most of the population of Earth has not, but there are those who have, and those numbers continue to grow. And it's like the work you do, Andrea, the work I do, the work that millions of other people are doing that are contributing to that. And as those numbers continue to grow, we will start to see some real results.
We will. And you said it earlier when we were talking, and that is you know that it'll all work out in the end. You said something to that effect. And I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And there are a couple things that I want to say. Number one is one of the things that we often might come up against is when we dream for the healthcare system that doesn't bankrupt us, or, insert there whatever issue we're talking about here, whichever issue kind of is important to you. But when we look at that, what happens is we'll often hear the counter argument about why we can't have it, that there's no solution to that. We've tried this, or those other countries, that doesn't work there. So there's always that counter argument to our dreams of better. And what I want to just put out there is, you know what? Just like in our own personal lives, we don't have to know what the end result has to look like. When I shared growing up and I was told, you're going to do this and that and the next thing, like I described a little while ago, right? The expectations of a life and what success means. We're told, okay, map your life out like this and end up here at this result, this goal. And we're so goal oriented. I invite everybody to scrap that, because here's the thing. We don't have to know what the end result is. So let's just throw that out right now and let that go. Because the important thing is we just take the first step toward better. That's it. Let's just do that. That's progress. And then from there, perhaps learn a little something, perhaps gain a little perspective, see what works, what doesn't work. And then guess what? Let's take another step toward better.
Mm-hmm.
And where we end up could far exceed anything we could dream up today. But let's stop bickering back and forth about what the answers are, and let's just start moving toward a better place. And we can do that. We can so do that.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I had this conversation with a client just about a week ago. I was so impressed with this client. Their goal in life was to every day be a better human than they were the day before. And what you just said, Andrea, really speaks to that. And honestly, I have been trying to do that for a number of years, because I don't know that I put it in those words that my client did. But yeah, we just try to do a little better every day, learning from what didn't work before and using that to do better. I think it was Maya Angelou, and if it's not, I apologize for whoever did say it. But I think it was her who said, "When you know better, you do better." And I
Mhm.
love that quote.
Yep.
And I just think that's so true because, first of all, that eliminates the need to feel guilty
Mhm.
about things that happened in the past, because things we did in the past are often simply because we didn't know better at the time. We were operating at a different level of consciousness, right?
Mhm.
And we can only operate within the level of consciousness we have at that moment. So if we move beyond that and then we look back and feel guilty or have regrets about what happened then, it can be so destructive because it keeps tying us to the past. We're dragging that around like a huge ball and chain. But when you realize that we were doing the best we could at the time and it's okay to let that go, it can be very liberating. So, what you said about doing better, I think is incredibly resonant, especially in this day and age. Of course, we don't have to know the answers. We don't know the answers. Even if we insist on knowing the answers, it's not going to happen. We don't know.
Yeah.
And the sooner we come to terms with that and just focus on what we can do, which is being a better human every day, I think the more likely we're going to see the huge change that we want to see happening sooner rather than later. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
Oh, well, I just totally agree. And I want to highlight one little aspect of this too. And that is we don't want to know the answer today because we don't know what we will know after we
Right.
start moving forward. It's like you could be, imagine that you're on a path in a beautiful forest. I say that so often, but imagine you're on a path in a beautiful forest. And as you walk down the path, what you see, what you are able to see changes. So you might take 10 steps down the path, and all of a sudden you notice, oh my goodness, there's a little stream that goes off to the right, and I can hear it trickle, and it's beautiful. And on my right, there are wildflowers there. But a few steps ago, you couldn't see either one of those things. So you get new information. You know new things as you move forward. And that new knowledge, the new experience informs your journey forward from that point. So let's stop with the limiting belief that we need to know the answer or the solution, because that would limit the possibility of what we could actually achieve.
Right.
Let's just start moving. And the other thing, too, that I wanted to mention, because we were talking about jobs and that kind of thing, and I want to say we're all spiritual beings.
Hmm.
And so I don't care if you're a Reiki practitioner and that's your full time job, or you're a teacher in a school, or a teller at a bank, or a cab driver, whatever it is, that bit of wisdom from your client, aspiring to be greater today than you were yesterday, that applies to every person on the planet, no matter what job you hold, no matter how
Hmm.
you spend most of your time. That's what we have in common is our
Hmm.
ability to hope, to dream, and to choose. Choosing the activities, choosing our focus, choosing our actions through awareness so that we can express better and greater than we did yesterday.
Hmm.
Now, as we do that, as individuals, our individual vibration raises.
Hmm.
We have more joy, we have more inner peace. And as people do that, again, across all walks of life, all cultures, all continents, it doesn't matter. That's how the collective consciousness vibration raises. And that's how the new earth is born.
Exactly. That's what it takes. Just
Yeah.
everybody trying to be a better human than they were the day before,
Mm-hmm.
one day at a time.
That's right.
And I'm glad you mentioned the word choose, because we have so many choices facing us every single day of our lives. Think of the thousands of choices. What do I have for breakfast? What socks should I wear? I mean, all those choices that we have, and we give most of them zero thought, right? We just do it.
Hmm.
But the choices affect our future. They affect us going forward. So I think it's time we start to be a little more conscious of our choices. And I'm not talking about your socks so much. That was sort of a silly example, but I'm just trying to make a point.
Yeah.
But when we start to make choices about ourselves and about, how we interact with others or the planet or animals or what have you, let's make them more conscious. Let's think more collectively instead of individually, and start to say, how can I make free will my friend?
Hmm.
Because we have free will. It can be a detriment to us and it can be a friend. So if we start to make free will our friend and make the choices that are uplifting and contribute to the overall evolution of the planet, wow, there's nothing we can't accomplish, truly.
That's right. And it's the individual choices that take the planet where it needs to go.
Exactly.
We,
Yes.
we don't have to solve climate change tomorrow,
No.
but let's bring this really to an individual thing. So, what I do, and I don't know, maybe you can share if you do this or something different, Kathleen, but we do have a lot of choices,
We do.
endless in a day.
Hmm.
And so, what I have started doing, well, I do two things. Number one, if I'm trying to make a decision and I really am torn between the two.
Hmm.
I could see pros and cons of both. What I will do is I'll use my vivid imagination and I pretend that I go this way and I make this choice. And I imagine what that would feel like and be like. And I experience that as much as I can. And then I wipe the slate clean. And then I imagine that I choose the other option and I feel it and sense it, just like I did the other one. I feel within me the difference there. And that can help inform my decision. And then the short version is I'm just moving about my day and I just feel, oh, this or that. And it's which one makes my heart sing more than the other one. So I think that's kind of the Cliff's Notes version of my first description. But early on, I very much used to use that immersion technique to try to sense the
Hmm.
result. But now I think I've just gotten a bit quicker at it. But when we choose what resonates and not with our food cravings or whatever, I mean, we want to tune into that deep, authentic part of ourselves, the wise part of ourselves. And when we do that and we choose what resonates at that level, oh, that's where it's at, so to speak,
Hmm.
because
Sure.
that will always guide you to the next best choice, the next best
Correct.
decision. And does that mean your life is rosy and you never have any problems?
No.
No, but we're going to need to do things in life that are difficult, but we learn a lot because that's why we're here.
Exactly. That's the purpose of life on planet Earth, to learn and to grow and to be
Mhm.
of service also. Now, what you do, that imagination thing, I've done that too. I do
Yeah,
that as well, and see how that feels inside, which one
yeah,
feels best. And yeah, very
yeah.
few of the choices that are what I consider significant choices are very cut and dried. Because if they're cut and dried, they're easy to make. The ones that I really wrestle with are the ones that a lot of gray there, a lot of gray.
Yeah.
But that's when it's really important to use your imagination and, okay, how does this outcome make me feel? And then sit with that for a bit. And then how does that outcome make me feel? And then there's always the possibility that there's some unknown outcome, right?
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
at least you have a place to start. And I think
Yes.
that's a good exercise to do when you're wrestling with a choice, because you're
Yeah.
tapping into who you are as
Yeah.
a soul, as a spiritual being.
I know. And as you're talking, and I'm like, we sound so like we have it all figured out. But you know what? But you know what?
Oh, that's funny, Andrea.
I
That's
know,
hilarious.
Isn't it? We totally don't. But what I was going to say is, when you were young, how does what we just talked about, how does that contrast with when you were young?
Oh my goodness.
When I was young, I don't know about you, I would ask everybody under the sun. Would you do that too?
What do you think?
Oh yeah. What do you think? What do you
think this is a good idea? Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's common, right?
Yeah.
But I think what has happened, at least for me, I'm going to say it's probably for you too, Kathleen, is we realize that the truth is actually an inner journey.
Right.
The truth resides within each one of us. And I don't want to discount getting advice, because that can be fun. It can help us think about other variables and different things like that. So there's certainly a place for getting advice from other people. But I look back, I must have been so exhausting to be around. Asking everybody for advice about so many different things. I'm really like, sorry.
Oh, no. Here comes Andrea.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
That's so funny. It's true, though. I mean, I think a lot of us really look for that external approval, validation. I think a lot of us do that. I've moved away from that. I can't say I don't do it anymore, because I still do, but I've moved away from that, I would say, in large part because I've learned to trust the inner self, that my higher self, my inner self, whatever you'd like to call it. I've learned to trust that. And that's not to say that I don't make mistakes, because sometimes I go, yeah, no, I don't want to do it that way. And I'll do it my own way and then go, crap, I should have listened.
Yeah.
But I learned something, right?
That's right. Yeah. You learn that you need to listen. So
I need to listen. Exactly.
There's always stuff to learn. Always stuff to learn.
Always. It never stops. And honestly, that's one of the things I love, because I love to learn. I'm always wanting to learn something new. So that to me is not a problem. I mean, just tell me, tell me what else I can learn, and I'm there. Okay. Yeah. I'm on board. So that's part of the fun, I think.
I think so too. The word inspiration is coming to me. It's been kind of on my radar, especially lately. I guess we started the conversation talking about COVID and all of that. And wow, we've kind of gone all over the place. But what I'll say is the COVID thing also taught me that there's something to be said for following inspiration instead of just following the pattern that you have been following. Instead of following the recipe card, what looks good to throw in here today? Right. What do I want to experience? If I could choose what to do with my time, what would I do? And I think that, wouldn't it be great if more of us did that, gave ourselves permission for that? Is, if I could do anything today in my free time, what would I do? And I think that can be a powerful tool for us, because that's honoring who we are, our creative side, our aliveness. That's listening and tuning in and honoring that. And in contrast, I have to get up and I have to do X, Y, and Z. I have to do these chores. I have to get these things on my to-do list done. And then, maybe by 5 o'clock, I'll be done and I can go and relax for a few minutes. Now, I just outlined a day, and I think so many people can relate to that day, right?
Of course.
But didn't we just say that a minute ago about life?
Yes, we did.
Maybe when I retire, then I can have fun. So let's bring it all the way down to today. Let's allow ourselves to have fun today and not put that off until maybe 5 o'clock or 7 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night when you get all of your stuff done. And I think if we allow ourselves more flexibility in our days, to be inspired and to listen to what we actually want to do, that's a huge beginning to that better and better and better.
Yeah.
We have to create more joy. We have to let the joy into our lives every day.
Yes. The more joy we let into our lives, the more we will contribute ultimately to the new earth.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's one of the hallmarks of the new consciousness, the new earth, is joy and compassion and gratitude and all those emotions that derive from love. And that's what it's all about.
Mm-hmm.
So if the more of that we bring into our lives starting today, even if it's just, carving out time in a day to do something that makes your heart sing, as you said earlier, or gives you a laugh, or just makes you feel good. Yeah, that's a
Mm-hmm.
start. It's better than what happened yesterday, right? And that's the point.
Yes.
Better
Yes.
today than you were yesterday.
Yeah. And
So,
and we need to say, Kathleen, some days you might not make it. And that's
exactly.
okay. That's okay.
Yeah, like my Saturday.
Yeah, like your
I was
Saturday.
definitely not better that day. I
That's
was
right.
a pretty crappy human on
Yep.
Saturday. It happens.
It does. And that's an exercise, an opportunity in blamelessness, in forgiveness
Exactly.
of the self, of understanding, of self compassion, of
Hmm.
giving yourself the break that you would give anybody else in your life. But we
Right.
often do not allow ourselves to feel
That's
for,
true.
for little old us, right?
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Little old us. We're not all that special, Andrea.
No,
I think we need to keep reiterating that in case anybody listening thinks that we have all the
no.
answers because, oh, no, no,
Oh,
no, no.
no. No, we're just practicing
We're
every
practicing,
day.
we're plodding along like everybody else,
We are.
trying to bring a little sunshine into the world when we can.
That's right. That's right. But I love sitting here and just talking with you. We didn't have an agenda today.
Nope.
We're just checking in as we described at the beginning of the episode. And I have to say, I just so enjoyed this. I hope the listeners have too and can relate. And you know, you know what we did? We were inspired.
We were. Speaking of inspiration,
Yeah.
I love that. It felt very inspired because it's organic,
Yeah.
it's authentic, because this is how we talk to each other when we
Hmm.
are not on a podcast, right?
That's right.
We
Yep.
have these kinds of conversations. And I hope some of what we said is valuable. But yeah, it was inspired.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I
Yeah.
love it too. I'm really happy that I have the opportunity to do this with you.
Oh, likewise, Kathleen. It's just, I tell you, one day we will meet each other.
We will. And it'll be like that commercial where you see two people running across the meadow toward each other
Yeah.
with the sappy music playing in the background.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Every
Yep.
time I think about us meeting, I get that image in my head and it makes me chuckle.
I know. Me too. Slow
Slow
motion
motion. Oh, gotta be slow motion.
in the
Oh
sunshine.
yeah.
Oh,
Sun,
yeah.
slow motion,
Yeah.
absolutely.
One of these days, one
One
of
of
these
these days.
days.
Hopefully it not in the too distant future.
Right. Absolutely. And so thanks everybody for listening, for sending in your emails to us, giving us your feedback. And we just love having you as part of our community. We'll sign off for now, and we hope that you'll join us again for another episode Beyond the Reiki Gateway.
Goodbye, everybody. It's been great.
We thank you again for joining us. And of course, we invite you to join us next time as we journey beyond the Reiki Gateway with Kathleen Johnson and Andrea Kennedy.